Hi. It has been brought to my attention that the world does not know the true history of human knowledge. I am a communicologist. I have been studying humans for roughly 20 years. I studied them in an academic and research environment for 7 years, and I have studied them on my own time extensively. I have put together a rather complete understanding of humans, their behaviors, why they do what they do. And I believe that there's not many people on earth that have amassed the specific knowledge that I have. So this is history as I've come to understand it. When I started my communicology studies, there were all these incredible things that I was learning about humans, learning how facial structure and hand gestures, tone, eye contact, and all these different things can have a profound effect on the interaction of human beings. But there were certain effects that always worked on some and never worked on others. And I started seeing these patterns. And so I started investigating these patterns. One fortunate day, I needed to get my watch battery changed, and I went into a watch repair shop. And there was this little Chinese lady behind the counter, very sweet. She said to me, "Young man, what's wrong? Why do you look upset? There's nothing to be upset about." And I described some relationship quarrels that I was having. And she laughed. And she said, "Oh, that sounds familiar. Sounds like a tiger and an ox." And she began to explain in great detail all of the issues that I was having in this relationship. As a communicologist, I set out with the intention to say, no, science can and will explain what I'm observing. But I wanted to collect more data. So I did, and I began researching on my own. That's when I started studying ancient civilizations, studying the behavior of humans 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000, 3, 4. How far back could I go? And it seemed like the further back I went, the more I just kept finding the same story. Just different places, different names, slightly different circumstances. So I studied the Egyptians. I studied how they operated, how they thought, how they ruled, their laws. And what I found was that some of their laws were more fair than they are today. So I said, let me see if I can go back further. and I started looking. And that's when I found the Sumerians. I went to the library at the university. Apologize for that. I went to the library at the university and I began reading about the Sumerians. And what I found was that it was the same story. It was the same story as the Greeks, the same story as Thoth, the same story as Hermes. It was all the same story. In fact, it was the same story that was in the Bible. And so I said, okay, what's really going on here? What's the actual truth? The unadulterated, uncontaminated truth. And this is what I found. According to the Sumerians, the Oannes arrived sometime between 405 and 435,000 years ago. They arrived and they were half men, half fish, with the body of a fish, the legs of a man, but inside the body of a fish was the face of a man. This is fragments of civilizations older than the Sumerians. Fragments going back to about the Great Flood, around 13,000 years ago. 12,500, 13,000 years ago, roughly. I'll pull something up so you can tag along. If it's the truth you're after, I have a website for it. I'll be working on posting more. But for now, we'll start at the beginning. The Chaldean Archive. After the Great Deluge, the Younger Dryas impact, the Great Flood, there was an advanced civilization that understood the situation and in an effort sent out individuals to each civilization to teach them about math, about astronomy, about medicine, about laws, and how to be civilized. And they taught them how to build. So these civilizations that came after the Sumerians, right? After the Great Flood was the Sumerians. And the Sumerians, they worked very hard to protect this knowledge. And then the Mesopotamians came in and they started changing some things. And then the Egyptians came in. Well, the Egyptians, they didn't like everything from the old, so they changed some things. They chiseled on the walls. They erased names and carved their own names in. They took credit for the work of prior civilizations. This continued on for some time until the Assyrian collapse sometime around 600 BC. Now, the Chaldean archive was managed by the Chaldean astrologer priests, who for thousands of years were the most important people in in the kingdom, in the governance of anything. I mean, the astrologers, they were the ones that would tell you when to plant, when to go to war, when to voyage across the seas, because they knew when summer was coming. They knew when winter was coming. The astrologers were the keepers of time. In their mind was the clock to keep track of time. And it was an honored and sacred role that's been demonized. And we'll go into that detail soon. The destruction of the Chaldean archive began sometime around 600 BC, but it didn't really get bad until later. Sometime around 300 BC, they realized that most of the Chaldean archive was damaged and was being destroyed where it was due to Persia and Babylon and those conflicts going on there. So Ptolemy the First and Ptolemy the Second put together an idea. They passed a law that said anyone that wants to do trade with Alexandria needs to submit to be copied any clay tablets, scrolls, or books that they have. Now, they needed individuals that could speak, read, write in all of the local languages and had the free time to do this, had the ability to come and work on this project. Well, the only people at the time that had that level of literature and the ability to do something like that were the Hellenists. So that's who was hired for the job. Essentially, the construction of the Library of Alexandria. Now, not the actual building, but the actual amassing and construction of the books and the knowledge. Now, sometime around Alexander the Great's era, he actually personally got to see some of the Chaldean archive that was remaining, as well as the work that was being done to transport what they still had of the Chaldean archive to the Library of Alexandria. And Alexander the Great of Macedonia, there are testimonies to him saying that in the archives are records of humans and human civilization going back over 200,000 years. Now, fast forward. Peak of the period, everything's great. Well, a lot of really intelligent people began to come to the Library of Alexandria. And a little more in-depth information. What the Library of Alexandria battled with is much like what we're battling with today with the internet and Twitter, X, as you have it, YouTube, and just this question of, do we allow all knowledge to exist? Because if we do, there's going to be some bad knowledge. Or do we get rid of all of it and only give the people what they need? So this was kind of the situation that they were running into as far as the elites and the people that were making the decisions for how the world was being run. So they made a decision. The Hellenists said, okay, look, we don't want everyone to have access to this knowledge because that's going to disrupt control. That's going to disrupt how the hierarchy of the world. It is knowledge that gives individuals power. So they said, we're going to start charging people for the knowledge at the Library of Alexandria. And they we're going to do this as well as the Hellenists, they started getting rid of some books. Now, arguably, the books they were getting rid of were pretty messed up books. One was, what was it? Uh, Starvation, Death by Starvation. So there was a book written and published, and it was published in the Library of Alexandria. And the Hellenists, the publishing was all handwritten, and so they published this book, and every single person almost that read this book killed themselves after reading it. The author was exiled and banished from Egypt, and all of his books were burned. Some philosophers still wonder today what was in that book, right? That was very close to just before the end of the Library of Alexandria. Fast forward to the end of the Library of Alexandria. So the Egyptians and the Macedonians are like, look, we want things to be fair. We want things to be fair and equal, and we want everybody to be able to get knowledge for free. So the Hellenists said, well, we did all this work and you don't want to pay us, so we're just going to take it because it's technically ours. So they hired Julius Caesar to go into Egypt and confiscate all of the books and scrolls and tablets on everything that the Hellenists wanted and burn the rest. It wasn't not even 48 years later that we reset our calendar system, all to what they decided there. And shortly after, the Greeks, or the Hellenists that changed their name to Greek, started taking credit for all the discoveries and all these incredible things that they were finding and coming up with and figuring out. Well, no, Greece didn't figure anything out. They just plagiarized everything. This is what led to the Greek economic crisis, in fact, as well as the one in 2008. They didn't actually get that knowledge by figuring it out. Rome figured this out pretty quickly when Greece started becoming a really hot topic. Rome showed up and was like, all right, cut us in on the deal, or we're just going to take it. And Greece was like, okay, fine. And that led to essentially the rise of the Roman Empire, was the collaboration between the Greeks and the Romans and the Italians. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't talk about is who was actually in control of all of this. So the Hellenists were the Greek Jews. And not only that, the Hellenists had some very questionable, culturally accepted practices that I won't go into detail. Fast forward even further, Athens creates the first university system, and they say, okay, we're going to charge for money. We're going to charge what we think we deserve because we did this. And fast forward even further, well, people are not happy about it. They don't like the idea that you need to pay money to go to one of Plato's academies to get an education, and if you don't have money, then, well, sorry. The rest of the books were burned. This led to a lot of conflict and tension, and eventually something did happen. All the Plato schools were destroyed by Emperor Justinian I of the Roman Empire. So when that happened, well, the Dark Ages shortly followed. because the only people that had all the knowledge was Rome. This is why Greece was such a short-lived tyranny. See, whoever holds all the knowledge, whether it's Egypt or Greece or Rome or whoever ends up with it today, as we face a new threat. So now that we've essentially rebuilt the Library of Alexandria on a digital platform, they're trying to take it away again. According to the astrologers, August 12th, 2025 is when Venus is going to complete its current petal cycle. And that will be the tipping point. I am here to encourage every single person that finds this video. If there's something on the internet and it matters to you, download it before August 12th.